You might disagree with this, but Volvos are easily the coolest of all of the European car brands. I mean, look at the V40. Is it a hatch? Is it a wagon? The whole thing is just so unique. Although these exteriors, they can have a few issues. But the interior, it's also Swedish and funky. Although there can be a few problems in here as well. But Volvos have this wonderful signature feel about the way they drive. Although with the V40, that can also sometimes be a bit of a nightmare.
And then there are the engines. There are way too many options here, and they all have their share of problems.
Okay, so as cool as the V40 is, maybe it's not the best used car to actually buy. Or is it? Well, this being ReDriven means we're going to answer all of those questions and so many more, because the whole reason we exist is to take you through the pros and cons of used cars and show you what they're like to actually live with and if you should buy one. So how about we start off with let's call it the small inconvenience of the suspension catastrophically failing. So we came across plenty of reports of the springs snapping. I know, insane, right? But especially with the front springs, and especially with these R-Design models with their lower and firmer suspension. But this has also been known to happen right across the V40 range, including the jacked up cross-country editions. Also the drop links, the front arms, the strut tops, and the bushes, they've all sort of been known to leave the chat. Now, if you catch any of these suspension issues before they sort of fail, the cost to repair them can be pretty affordable. But if you let things escalate, well, the price to repair them can do exactly the same. Plus, any dodgy suspension can also accelerate tyre wear, and we don't want that happening. So if you ignore any clunking or weird vibrations or knocking sounds or the car sort of pulling to one side or the other, you might just be increasing the bill to fix it all when it all does go wrong. And it's not just the suspension worries either. The rear brakes, they're known to stick a little bit, and the fronts, they can wear prematurely as well. And obviously it should go without saying that having dodgy suspension and brakes is absolutely going to ruin the driving experience of the car. And that's a crime, because when everything is working perfectly, they are an absolute joy to drive, especially these R-Designs. Okay, the suspension's a little bit on the firm side, but you've got to expect that. It's the R-Design. But it's nowhere near as crashy as some of the other cars in this class. And the overall handling and comfort is fantastic. It feels so premium. But again, that through that corner. But again, to have a V40 feel as good as this, the suspension and brakes, they need to be in tip-top shape. But a hot tip from the owners here, if the car you're looking at has had the brakes replaced or the suspension repaired, or maybe you're looking at doing that yourself, genuine parts, or even better yet, quality aftermarket parts are an absolute must. See, plenty of owners have found that cheap aftermarket parts can just actually be more problematic and they're just a terrible, terrible band-aid solution. But on the flip side, other owners that have fitted quality aftermarket suspension parts especially have found it can completely transform the car, both for handling and comfort. Actually, the other thing that might impact your comfort and enjoyment of the V40 is if the entire car just catches on fire, which apparently could be a thing due to a dodgy fuel line. But look, good news, this was fixed with a recall, as were some problems with some melting engine bay plastics, and there were some safety concerns that got fixed with recalls as well. They had to do with the airbags, but this is why it is so critical to make sure that any car you're looking at has had any recalls seen to. And the same goes for maintenance and servicing. Remember, this is a European car, so any missed servicing or maintenance could end in disaster. Also, being a Volvo, depreciation can be a real concern. These rarely, if ever, can match a Mazda 3 or a Toyota Corolla for retaining value. And also, being a European car, the cost of parts can ask a hell of a premium too. For example, on some of the earlier models, the headlights, they could build with condensation. Now, there is a DIY fix for this, but some owners have had to replace the entire headlight. But then on the post-update models with the LED strips for the daytime running lights, they can dim or yellow or just fail. But the problem there is to replace it, you've got to replace again the entire headlight cluster, and they can cost north of $1,700. Now, nobody talks about this, but the seats in these things are absolutely fantastic. Granted, these are the sportier, R-Design seats, but even the seats in the more consumer level V40s, really, really good. Perfect amount of supportive, yet very, very comfortable. Brilliant. And the overall ergonomics, typical for a Swedish car, everything is just spot on. Also, the feeling of quality in here is so high, like everything is bloody super, super solid. And the overall design, I just love this. I love the whole waterfall thing. This whole chrome strip thing here, it's like subtle, like it's very cool, but just spicy enough to make it a bit more interesting. And the materials used, okay, on the seats, this Alcantara feels great. The leather's still nice and soft. All through here, like there are a few hard, scratchy plastics, but overall, the vibe this interior gives you is fantastic. And also, plenty of owners compliment just the levels of resilience with these interiors, and this is a great example of that. This thing's like 12 years old. You'd never tell. Like all the metal bits through here, nothing's too scratched because they're resilient. Well done, Volvo, for not putting gloss black plastic everywhere, because this plastic here ages really nicely. All through the doors, all these high traffic areas, really good condition. The seats are in really good nick. And this is kind of standard across the range. You've really, really got to abuse these interiors to get a sense that they will wear and tear. I mean, even the switchgear, like things just feel, oh, like that feels just nice to use. The buttons on the steering wheel, everything just feels good. It's an enjoyable place to be. However, as we mentioned at the start of the video, these wonderful interiors, they can be guilty of a few issues. First of all, before you buy the car, make sure the air conditioning works on every single function and for long periods of time. Now, the reason for that is that the internal blend door motors, they can basically fail, and it means that the car is left on either blowing air at your feet or maybe on the windscreen, and no matter what you do, it won't change the direction of the air. Also, a leaking evaporator, it can just play havoc with your air conditioning in all sorts of functions. So again, drive the car for a while, try all the functions and make sure it's consistent. Now look, if it's not working correctly, hopefully it's a pretty cheap and easy fix. It often is. However, some owners have been stuck with having to pull the entire dashboard out of the car to fix these problems, and that can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Although sometimes those costs to repair can increase unexpectedly, because when you're pulling things apart, some of the plastics are starting to become a bit brittle, and if they snap and break, you've got to replace them, and then there's extra costs involved in that. Not to mention even getting some of the parts in behind this dashboard can become a bit of a challenge. Also, check the quality of the door seals, both on the body of the car and around the doors themselves, and the mirror, because apparently the glue that holds this stuff on is starting to lose its adhesive qualities, and they can kind of fall apart. Actually, so can the illuminated section of the gear selector, if it has one. But interestingly, when it comes to electronic faults and just general problems with the interior, these seem to be far less guilty of issues compared to the Germans from, Audi, Mercedes-Benz, BMW. Although when you combine brittle plastics, glue that doesn't really stick anymore, and firm suspension, obviously rattles can become a real problem. Although in saying that, in this car, and like plenty of others, hardly any rattles. Again, this thing's from 2012. You've got well over 60,000 Ks on the clock, and it's pretty much silent in here. Although other owners that have got far more kilometers than this, or if their car's been living outside in the hot Aussie sun its entire life, yeah, rattles can be really bloody annoying. Actually, as can having your dashboard light up like a hyperactive Christmas tree, which plenty of owners have had happen, especially when they've replaced the battery with a cheap and nasty one, or they haven't recalibrated the module for it. See, in the same way that boomers really struggle to cope with any kind of criticism or not getting their own way, the V40 can really struggle with sort of any incorrect voltage or just the wrong battery specs. Things like the start-stop tech just not working at all, or maybe the car refuses to start but only now and again, or any other electrical gremlins, they can all be down to problems with the battery. Although some of the common problems might have nothing to do with the battery, and they can just be the actual components failing. For example, the doors not opening or unlocking from the outside, that can be a failing actuator. Although for the models post the 2015 update, those actuators are far more resilient. But then it's a shame they didn't revise the fuel flap actuator with the update, because no matter if it's pre or post update, these things can fail and it can just refuse to open or sometimes refuse to lock. Then the power folding mirrors, these are known to stop working because the little tiny motorized gears in there, they can either snap or just seize up, especially in cold climates or dusty environments. If you get an ESC service required warning on your dash, this can be due to the ABS or the traction control sensors corroding. And then we come to the infotainment systems, which, like so many cars from this era, can just be bloody horrible, both in terms of reliability and just to use. There are plenty of reports of Bluetooth connections dropping out. Using it can just be glitchy and just bloody annoying. And the sensor screen system, the whole thing, they're known to either lock up or freeze or just turn off. Now, often a software update can resolve plenty of these issues, but sometimes it can be a more insidious problem within the infotainment system itself, and you have to replace some of the hardware. This can be a massive pain in the ass. But in this system's defense, find me any technology in a car or outside of a car of this sort of age that is still working perfectly reliably these days. It doesn't really happen. And look, anyway, all this sort of infotainment stuff can just be replaced anyway. That means you can have the latest in wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and Bluetooth connection that is actually stable. You can fit a high definition rear view camera, maybe a dash cam, maybe swap out the speakers for more premium ones or fit an amp with a DSP or a subwoofer. All this stuff is possible. And to show you what is actually possible, we teamed up with our mates from Automotive Superstore to make sort of the ultimate in-car entertainment guide video. Check it out, it'll answer all your questions. The link for it is down below. Actually, you know what? You know how I was talking about aftermarket parts before? Automotive Superstore is the place to go and get all that sort of stuff. They carry thousands and thousands of items. They ship Australia-wide and everything's covered by a full manufacturer's warranty. We've added their link down there as well. Now, this might surprise you, but this car shares pretty much the same platform as the Ford Focus, which is also incredibly close related to the BL Mazda 3. Even when it comes to engines, prior to the 2015 update, which was basically a mechanical overhaul, V40s share a whole bunch of Ford engines, to the point that this 2.5 litre 5-cylinder turbo is kind of like, you could think of it as the diet version of the engine that you'll find in the Mark II Focus RS. And it's bloody wonderful. Like, you just get a hint of that lovely 5-cylinder kind of warbly sound. With an intake and an exhaust and maybe a downpipe, this thing could sound bloody wonderful. And then there's the way it just builds pace. It's such a great amount of power. And there's something about the power delivery of a 5-cylinder engine that I just love. And also the performance on tap here. Look, it's not the fastest car on the streets these days, but it's such a great amount of power. Overtaking, complete breeze. It's the perfect, I'm gonna say perfect sort of power to weight ratio through this roundabout. Oh, man, like just the way it comes out of there, it's just, honestly, it's so enjoyable. Although another problem, when you do have some fun with your right foot, fuel consumption can take a hell of a hit, especially in the 5-cylinder. But easily one of the best value for money sleeper cars out there has to be the V40 cross country with this 2.5 litre turbo. Think about it for a second. You've got what? Pushing 250 horsepower, 5-cylinder turbo, all-wheel drive, in a jacked up kind of hatchback, wagony kind of stylish body thing, and all for well under 20 grand. I mean, talk about a bargain fast car in disguise. That thing's awesome. And with the lifted ride height, you're not going to have to worry about all the potholes in our shitty Sydney roads. However, there can be a bit of an issue with the entire range, and it's that many owners feel the safety calibrations are just a bit too sensitive. Now, these safety systems, they can apparently be adjusted, but the thing is, if they don't adjust, it might not be an electrical issue. It might be that the windscreen isn't a factory item, or maybe the windscreen hasn't been recalibrated to the safety systems. And look, obviously we normally recommend aftermarket parts to save some money and whatnot, but with the windscreens, you might just be better off sticking with the OEM replacements. Although, do not do that when it comes to wiper blades. Here's the real truth. Genuine replacement wiper blades are generally a rip-off. And then the cheap aftermarket ones, they suck. Like, they might last for a couple of months, but then they just do a shit job at wiping. Avoid all of those traps by scanning that QR code or hitting the WiperTech link down below to get 15% off and free express shipping on some of the best blades in the business. And as long as you have, I'm gonna say, toddler levels of dexterity, they're an absolute breeze to fit yourself. Actually, you know what? Don't do any of that if you're going to do what Vish has done and lend us your car to feature, because if you do that, we're just going to give you a set of WiperTech blades for free as a thank you present. To volunteer your car, simply email me. My email address is down below. Also, if you've got any e-commerce needs but you haven't got heaps of cash, make sure you check out his business, Avira Digital. The link is down below. Absolute legends. Also, do yourself another favor and make sure that any of the scuttle or the sunroof drains are clear. Better yet, find a car like this that doesn't have a sunroof, because if those drains get clogged, water can leak into the car, and that can cause all sorts of electronic issues, or your car could end up smelling like
surströmming,
which is that kind of weird fermented Swedish cuisine that apparently smells like wet Volvo V40. But interestingly, when it comes to water leakage issues or electronic gremlins or just general exterior problems, like the interior, these seem to be far better built and more reliable than really any of the other European counterparts from Volkswagen and Audi and BMW and Mercedes-Benz. Now, have you ever noticed this pattern where, you know, SUVs that are sort of shaped like a coupe can therefore offer limited practicality? I hate to say it, but the same thing can kind of be happening here. See, visually for me, the V40 is sort of somewhere between a hatchback and a wagon, but unfortunately it doesn't really offer the levels of practicality of either. Don't get me wrong, there are some really cool features like the sort of flippy floppy floor thing, that's absolutely genius. And there are some other cubby bins and cubby holes around here. But compared to other cars in this class, it does have one of the smaller boots. Also, the opening aperture, it isn't sort of a great size or shape either. Speaking of oddly shaped things, my body is exactly 40.26% of the length of the iconic Volvo 850R touring car in station wagon form. Don't know what's more oddly shaped, my body or that car. Anyway, this is in my driving position, and you know what? Not too bad. It is a smaller car, so my knees are rubbing up against the back of the seat a little bit, but then Volvo have been smart enough to kind of have this little cutout section, so if you sit like you're waiting to go to lunch when you're in primary school, you've actually got room for your knees. The seats themselves, really, really comfortable, and they've actually got a bit of support to them as well. And because it's the R design, you get this sort of Alcantara and leather effect. You're also sort of stuck there a bit like Velcro. Windows are a good size. Also, this whole car is very dark, but I don't feel claustrophobic in here for whatever reason. Maybe because the design is just so bloody good. Also, okay, there's a little bit of hard, scratchy plastic here and there, but this all feels really nice. This feels really nice. This feels really nice. Everything feels really nice. And then as far as features and practicality go, you've got a couple of matte pockets on the backs of the seats there. You've got a pull-down armrest here, which I love how thin that is. But then, my favorite thing, maybe of the whole car, besides the engine, the cup holders. You're looking at this going, well, where are the cup holders? They're there. How brilliant is that? It's integrated into the middle section of the seat. I'm gonna go out and say this is my favorite cup holder of all time. And they've got the little fingery things to hold your small pretentious coffees. Volvo, that's bloody genius. Plus even more storage here, the door bins. You can actually get to them when you have legs. In so many cars in this category, they've got a door bin and you just cannot get to it unless the door is open. But with the Volvo, you can. And then up front, practicality is surprisingly good. First of all, massive glove box. Look at this. That's like my whole arm in the glove box, and there's another little shelf on top as well. Under the slidey trapdoor, you've got two cup holders. Annoyingly though, if you put one of my small pretentious coffees in, like, let's go an espresso with just a dash of oat milk. If you put one of those in there, it's just gonna wobble around all over the place. Under the slidey armrest here, you've got more storage under here. That's a pretty decent size. Okay size door bins there. I love this from Volvo. This section in so many other cars would have a little section under here. It would just fill up with all sorts of crap and filth. But with this, it's just a door handle. Well done, Volvo. Another little storage cubby holders there. More storage behind the waterfall. Nowhere for sunglasses up there. But some models apparently have like a secret storage bag under the seats. I don't think this one does, but yeah, if you're looking at one, look for the secret storage bag. Also, as far as what features you're going to get, obviously this is going to vary depending on the model and the trim spec of the car, or if it's a pre or post update. But because Volvo are often sort of the underdog European car manufacturer, especially compared to the Germans, you generally get more bang for your buck in terms of the features you get for what you pay compared to an Audi, a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz, especially if you find one of these fitted with any of the optional extra packs. But speaking of bang for your buck, does your wallet need to be concerned about the engine going boom, or maybe the gearbox turning into some kind of Swedish meatball dish? Unfortunately, I can't answer any of these questions because I'm not a qualified mechanic. Luckily, Jim is.
Depending on where you're watching this from, there are about a dozen different engine and transmission options here. Any manufacturer that thinks they can research, develop and make reliable that many engine and transmission options is absolutely delusional. In fact, to make this a bit easier to understand, I'm going to split it into pre-facelift and post-facelift, and petrol and diesel. Starting with the pre-facelift petrols, the 1.6 and the 2 litre. Look, the 1.6 litre engine here is from the early versions of the EcoBoost family. It is absolute dog shit. Cylinder head, cylinder bore issues, turbo issues, you name it. And it's also mated to that absolute dog shit transmission, the PowerShift DCT. Absolutely one to be avoided. And the 2 litres, really not much better. All of the same problems, although it hasn't got that gearbox, but plenty of other engine issues, head gasket issues, bore cracking issues, turbo complications. But oil consumption is the one you really have to look out for. And even if you're getting a pre-purchase inspection, you can't really tell how bad that is. So look, it's just too risky. But the petrol 5 cylinders, not too bad. Not perfect though. Probably the most common issue you're likely to see is the PCV diaphragm splits. When that happens, you'll hear the thing making a horrible humming sound. And if you pull the dipstick out and that noise stops, you know you've got a PCV valve problem. You can actually change that diaphragm without renewing the whole oil filter housing assembly. It's not too difficult, but sometimes that oil filter housing is leaking anyway, so you've got to pull the thing off and change it. Something to look out for here is the drive belt tensioner. That can fail, and when that fails, if you're unlucky, that drive belt just tangles around the crankshaft pulley, and sometimes that can actually go in behind the timing belt cover and derail the timing belt and basically destroy your engine. You really need to keep an eye out for that. Look out for oil leaks, especially from the rear of the head where they have the 2 camshaft blanking plates. And coolant leaks, you're going to see them from the thermostat housing and the expansion tank usually. And any coolant leaks can actually lead to an overheating event. These engines do not like being overheated. They usually blow a head gasket after they've been hot. And obviously, head gasket repair is very expensive. Now keep an eye out for the right-hand engine mount. They are very prone to breakage. In fact, all of the engine mounts on these are pretty soft, and you need to keep an eye on them. Now the diesels from the pre-update, now the 4 cylinders, this engine is shared with some Peugeots and Fords and Minis as well. Look, they are very sensitive and you have to service them very regularly. One of the common problems they have is injector seals. They leak and the soot leaks internally into the engine, and then the engine oil sludges up and that blocks the pickup, and that can also block the turbo feed strainer. The turbos die early, and in bad cases, that oil pickup at the bottom of the sump blocks up too, and that pretty much kiss your engine goodbye. So yeah, if you have one, change the bloody oil every 10,000 kilometers. As I said, yeah, I'd be avoiding this engine. Now the pre-update 5-cylinder diesels, these are actually known as being one of Volvo's better engines actually. Although that's a bit like calling Ted Bundy one of the better serial killers because he's slightly better looking. They do have all the usual DPF and EGR complications. Engine mounts as well on these, actually they break more commonly on the diesel. These are very well known for clogging up the inlets. In fact, these engines are probably one of the worst offenders if you ask me. When those inlets clog up badly enough, that makes the swirl flaps in the manifold fail, and to change that you have to pull the manifold off because it's all integrated into the top of the head, and you've got to pull the injectors out to get at it, so it's a bit of a pain in the ass. Keep a very close eye on the harmonic balancer. That's the front pulley on the engine. That fails often, and that takes out the drive belt, and that can also take out the timing belt when it shreds around everything. And again, when that happens, it will destroy your engine, so keep a good eye on the front of that engine. So yeah, other than those potentially catastrophic engine failing problems, the 5 cylinders are okay. And now onto the petrols from the post update. I'll group the 1.5 and the 2 litres together here because they are part of the Volvo VEA engine modular program. They're not great, but they're not shit either, so they're just engines. Again, Volvo can't seem to make an engine that doesn't burn oil. That's the biggest problem with these things. The problem here is if you don't manage the situation and the engine runs low on oil, well, you can have a catastrophic engine failure. It's just something else you have to worry about. They are also known for high pressure fuel pump complications. Not overly common, but it is a known issue. And again, they do have a very complex cooling system with a lot of plastic components that absolutely will be a pain in your ass after about 150,000 kilometers. Now the diesels from the post update. Look, a few issues here, and most of them actually emissions related. Failed EGR valves and failed EGR coolers are pretty common on these, and they're not cheap to fix. And guess what? They are also prone to oil consumption. No surprises there. And they're also prone to oil dilution. Now when the oil dilution gets bad enough, that can create additional soot loading for the DPF, which does require more frequent DPF regenerations, which is generally okay if you're doing frequent trips at highway speeds for extended period of time. But if you live in the city and you're mainly doing school pickups and grocery getting, this is actually going to be a problem for you, and you may end up in limp mode, and you may end up at your mechanic getting a forced DPF regen. And if that's done in conjunction with an oil and filter change, which it should be, look, it's not a cheap thing to do, and it's a pain in the ass. Now, the biggest thing I have to talk about with all of these engines, they all have timing belts. And the service intervals on these range from 140,000 kilometers up to 240,000. So you absolutely have to make sure that this is done because it will kill your engine if it breaks. So just check with your mechanic and just make sure that it is done on time.
So, unless you're a hardcore Volvo fan willing to put in the time and money and emotion, maybe you shouldn't buy any of the lower spec models. The biggest problem they have are the alternatives. A Mazda 3 or a Honda Civic are easily as nice to drive, more practical, just as well equipped, yet they generally avoid many of the V40's reliability and build quality concerns. Plus, they'll avoid many of the premiums that some of the spare parts can ask on these, and they'll generally hold their value better on the used market as well. In other words, if you're not a proper car head, don't buy a V40. But if you are, actually, in that case, yeah, we still wouldn't be buying any of the lesser models. For us, the potential negatives and the cost of ownership outweigh any of the positives. Yeah, they're cool to look at and they're nice enough to drive, but that's about where it ends. However, when it comes to these T5 models, well, that's a whole different story. Sort of. See, if you're a dedicated fan and you're happy to bathe the spiciest of the V40 models in the sizable amounts of TLC that they will require, and you found a fantastic example just like this one, and it passes all the critical pre-purchase inspection stuff, it's a yes from us, as long as you know what you're getting yourself into. Or if you want something arguably just as unique as this, that still does pretty much everything this can do, check out one of these. Does your wallet need to be... This Ford Ranger's going to ruin our take.
In the bin without looking. You know why that was funny? In the bin without looking.